I'm Roger Lubeck. I'm the president of a company called Corporate Behavior Analysts. This is Chris Hansen. He's a senior consultant in our firm. We've been in business for over 20 years, consulting with rather exclusively the title industry, although we have a number of other kinds of businesses we've worked in. Our focus is on small businesses primarily and on the leadership and management of a small business, but our specialty is title insurance. We've worked in every state in the United States where there is title insurance and title agents. That excludes Iowa. But we've been in every other state working with the largest and some of the smallest agents in the state. We have a long history of working with the two large underwriting families today. We've worked with Chicago Title and the Fidelity family since we've started, and with First American and some others, and some regionals. We've worked with over 100 title agents privately. So we have quite an experience in how you guys do things, what you do, the differences across the country. You know, the business in New York is quite different than the business in Texas, for example, or California. And our advantage, I think, is that we understand the business here in New York, and we understand the business in Florida. So if you're a New York agent and you're only going to work here, we probably understand a lot of what you do, although you all use, as you know, a unique language compared to everybody else in the country. So you call a commitment something else, and you talk about abstractors, nobody else does, and so there's a little bit of a language issue when you work across the states. In terms of New York, is very different actually than many of the other states. And also, I would say that, you know, quill pens aside, New York has been and can be rather slow in adopting technology, as you probably recognize just from this talk today. One of the things that we've done recently in our company, as we sort of worked in title companies for a long time, in leadership and management, we've had a number of seminars and workshops. We've offered hundreds actually across the country that focus on maybe the 12 things you do as a manager or as a leader. And recently we've put that information together in a book, which is shown here, called Finding the Right Path. And this is a book about leading and managing a title company. It's written just for your industry. Now, it has examples from other kinds of industries, sure, but it talks about a closer and an escrow officer and settlement, and it talks about title examination, and, you know, and most books on management don't do that. So this is kind of a unique book in our minds that is really intended to address your industry, and yet it's for an owner or a manager talking about how you would structure, not how you run technically the business, but how you work as a manager in almost any business. But the examples we use are title related. So if you're interested in this book, we can talk to you later about the book. Now, when we chose this cover, the graphic artist that we worked with came up with this on his own, and we're both psychologists by training, by the way, and I was a little bit disturbed that we were going to use the image of a maze and, like, you know, my days of running rats in a maze or something, and I sort of said, well, and he said, no, you know, it's like that marble game, you know, where you had the wood game and the marbles. Do you remember that game? What was it? Chris, would you give him a book?
Yes, I sure will.
That's right. It was The Labyrinth. And you get a book just for knowing that.
This is what we call positive reinforcement.
Now here, in fact, let's hope. Yeah, well, I'm going to do this, guys. I hesitate to do this because gosh knows what could now happen, but let's see. We're just opening and closing again, trying.
Good afternoon.
Uh-oh.
I am standing in for Roger Lubeck and Chris Hansen. First,
does a
let
better
me say
job,
what a pleasure
actually.
it is to be here at the New York State Land Title Association Symposium on e-recording. I understand this has been some month here in New York. So, before I begin, I think all of you deserve a little applause. Roger and Chris are around somewhere getting ready. They asked me to stand in for them because I have a white beard. We all do at CBA.
Now, does anybody know how this was created? Anyone? Well, it probably is. I don't mean technically. I meant what's the company that creates them? This is called Extra Normal. Extra Normal. And Extra Normal is a company that was invented 4 years ago. 5. It now has 12 million film videos created by amateur movie makers. It has 300 characters, including all of the celebrities and political figures you could imagine. And you write the script, and they say it. Yeah. So if you want to write a dirty postcard to a friend, you can. But we used it to develop a script to train phone skills in a title company. Because if you have 3 offices, they don't answer the phone the same, do they? They don't. I guarantee you that. And one of them probably in New Jersey goes, yo, with some gestures. Now, if you want to change that, you could try to spend hours in seminars and lectures and you screaming at them and yelling. And we finally realized, why don't we just have them watch a training video that's a lot of fun with a clever character, and he does the whole thing, and you can watch it as long as you want, and eventually you've just got to demonstrate you can do the script. Now, that's an example of how technology could be used differently and innovatively, but it has nothing to do with title insurance, does it? But it has to do with using technology, okay? Now, I was going to show you, let's see if this now works. It does. Ooh, start them again, okay. Here's the labyrinth as we used to do it, right? This is a person using a double ball. Now, that's got to be a lot, you know. How many of you had one of these? How many had more than one? You know, right. Every Christmas we got a new one because we screwed it up or broke it or something. This company is 80 years old. The labyrinth was invented in Sweden. We stole the copyright because they didn't copyright it correctly, and 6 companies later sold it in the United States the next year, and we've been selling it ever since at Christmas, right? And 4 or 5 years ago, it went into the dumpster as a company. Why would that be? Bumpers, hard case sounds, 62 different types of labyrinths, all challenging you. And this is Labyrinth Light. Now, how is a 100-year-old company or a 20-year-old company going to compete when they're selling a wooden box made the same way forever? How are you going to compete with a company that suddenly sells your product for free and it's on everybody's phone? I have it on mine, okay? How are you going to compete with that? And you might say, well, Roger, what does this have to do with title insurance? But it has everything to do with title insurance. You've been doing title insurance. I bought a home 30 years ago when I joined our company. I bought a home 30 years ago. And I was trained that week in the title process at the same time. I walked through Chicago Title's complete process downtown in Chicago, did everything, mirrored the steps and everything. I then had the worst closing experience I've ever had with a different underwriter. And I've used that story for 30 years. I just bought a home in California 30 years later. Think of the technology. I had exactly the same experience. The technology has improved everything. Everything was done faster. Yet everything was done at the last minute. Nothing was signed correctly. The bank was crazy. The title company was quite calm and composed. They were great. But it was still all the same stupid problems I had 30 years ago. Why is that? It's because we've taken each new technology and we've laid it on top of the same way we've always done it. I know you don't have sealing wax and typewriters anymore, but it doesn't seem like you don't. Sometimes in our offices, doesn't it seem like we're doing the work the same way we did it 20 years ago? Well, if you're going to think about using technology effectively, you have to think about not just laying on top of the chariot wheels a new buggy, you have to redesign the road. So we're going to talk a little bit about maybe some ways in which you could redesign in what you'd call the digital age. And that's kind of a funny term too, because do you know when the digital age started? Does anybody know? If you got the right date, I'd give it to you.
The IBM PS1
That's probably be good. Oh, that's good enough. You could have one. 1984, digital age begins. Goal, computer in every home. Do we have that? Not quite. But what's the digital age goal now? Well, it's gone a little bit beyond that. It's actually the internet access in every home, isn't it? Right? But we're pretty close to that, too. You know, that last 100 feet or last mile can be a challenge. And yet, if you think about it, in a matter of, 30 years or more, 40 years, we've gone from, the IBM desk writer with the little ball, to, not using computers at all, but using tablets. For gosh, if you use a Surface, I mean, if you think the iPad's remarkable, that Surface is something, because the keyboard on that Surface is remarkable, and it does Windows, Office Suite, which your iPad doesn't do, does it? Well, that's kind of remarkable to have this little thin thing you can carry around like that, and you're never going to have a computer, and you're never going to have a big briefcase. It's changing, and yet we still do things oftentimes the same way. We still make the same problems, even though we've got all this new technology. How many are familiar with one of those two shows, Mission or Restaurants Impossible or Kitchen Nightmares? Both these guys would not be guys you'd want to work for, actually. But this is a show about a small business called a restaurant, and it's about restaurants that are failing. Now what's the typical scenario of any one of these, but what's the typical scenario of the restaurant? What do we encounter when Robert Irvine walks in or Gordon Ramsay gets there? What's the restaurant like? Somebody tell me. I'm sorry? It's inefficient. It's empty, maybe. It has just a smattering of loyal, crazy customers because they're eating the worst food on earth. The floor is always filthy. Right, right. Now, you know what? Your businesses are not like that. Well, there were a couple we went into over in Queens, and I mean, I don't know, is this really a title company, I said? It doesn't look like one. I don't know. But having said that, it isn't really the appearance even that disturbs you. What is the main characteristic of why they're failing in these shows? Go ahead. He wants a book. No, that is not it. What is it? Here? Did you say this? Yes, he can have a book. It's mismanagement.
I'm beginning to feel like Vanna White here.
Chris doesn't have a role yet, a speaking part, but he's going to get one in a minute. So, thank you, Vanna. It was very nice of you. Oh, we don't have many more to give out, and these are all proofs with errors in them. So good. We like to give you guys the error ones because you'll find them and write us. You know, there's an error on page 4. Yeah, that's why we gave it to you. Yeah, so poor management, owners who cared a lot, started a little business on their own. Maybe they wanted to be chefs, or maybe they were chefs. Maybe they were technically proficient. Maybe they were lawyers. They started this business. They got it going well. They did a good job of it. They got customers. And then for the next 30 years, what happened? Nothing. Right, nothing happened. You're right. They did exactly the same menu, exactly the same food, prepared the same way, except Uncle Bob died. We got a new guy in. He doesn't do it quite as well. And we're just doing the same thing, right? And the solutions, although these guys approach it very differently, they're all doing kind of mental health counseling now. I don't know why. They're not worried about the food, apparently. But the fact is, when you look at small businesses like title companies, they do have those same problems. They often have maybe a charismatic owner who's now close to retirement. Maybe they have a son or daughter who wants to take over it, but maybe they're not ready to or will never be able to. but they're doing work the same way. And while they've got loyal, dedicated customers, they're not serving poor food, but they're not innovating or growing. And probably financially, they're dying. So even though they have a solid technical business, title company, when we look at their finances over the last 4 years, this has not been a good time for title companies. We understand that, right? But the thing is, here we were on a downturn, so we can accept that you lost money. But now we're on an upturn. Are you still losing money? Are you making it like you should? That's the thing that we want to think about, of how we can improve your business. But we have to take a look at, in fact, does your business have many of the features that make a business unsuccessful, or does it have the features that will make a modern business successful? And now I'm going to fade away.
Yeah, now, so
into
see
the
this
distance.
blue dot right here on the side? That's important because that's when I get to talk. So if you guys out there see that blue dot and Roger's talking, just, hint or point or something, I appreciate it. So the question going forward now for you folks is, how are you going to compete going forward? What about brand recognition? Is that going to be your strategy? Better marketing, better sales, have better locations, focus on your people in some way. Are you going to have your product outperform your competitor in some fashion? Are you going to start looking at customer service again and trying to elevate that above your competitors? Are you going to invest in better technology, as we've been talking about today? Are you going to look at the cost side in some way? Or are you going to compete on price?
Now, we're going to argue somewhat. Were you still talking?
Does he get a book?
No.
Oh.
Well, one of yours, if you want to give him one, sure. But we're going to argue that these first ones are all a waste of your time. You've already done all those. And no one can make a better product than you do, because you spend 20 times the amount of time necessary to search and examine your commitments. And you waste an enormous amount of time on it. So can you make it more accurate? I doubt it. But no one cares. Not in a residential file. They might in a commercial file, but come on. It's a residential transaction. You make a little error on it, we'll correct it later. Okay? I'm not talking about missing deeds now, but let's be serious. If you search back 100 years on property for a residential property where the lot was platted 8 years ago, I'm wondering what you're doing. But people do that all the time in the title business, because that's the way they were trained, right? Now, if we had a technology that didn't allow them to do that, they wouldn't. But when we create that technology, people say, well, that's not the old way. I want to go back to the old way. But we've tried all these. Maybe what we need to focus on, we're going to argue, is how do we enhance service but do it through technology, which lowers our cost? Because if you don't lower your cost, in the next 10 years, you will not be in business. And if you don't have a modern technology, I would argue you will also not be in business, because this wave is coming.
One of the new ideas, or fairly new ideas in the last 5 years or so, is this notion of blue ocean. Blue ocean strategy.
It even has a little, yeah.
Yeah, I see that as a wave.
Nice, yeah.
So we're going to talk about blue ocean strategy.
How many are familiar with the Blue Ocean Strategy book? A couple people, good for you. You don't get a book for that, but you can get, you get their book, but we don't have it. This is a really interesting idea, actually put together by a couple Harvard types, looking at traditional ways of selling products versus some what they called innovative or different ways. And they coined the term blue ocean and red ocean, which is kind of a clever idea. The red ocean is what?
It's muddled. It's cloudy.
It's cloudy with what?
Everyone's in the red ocean.
Everyone's in it, fighting, competing. It's bloody. That's why it's red. It's bloody from competition. Their notion is that the difference that you see is that people that are competing in the red ocean, the bloody ocean, are using a strategy broadly is called differentiation, which means I use salespeople, you use customer service. You use your closing department, I use my product quality. But we're each competing on a feature of our company. Does that make sense? Okay? Their idea is that some businesses redefine themselves and create relatively a marketplace that has no competitors. So they're free to do anything they want because they've created an innovative product for a different group of customers. They're not selling the same old thing. So what kind of water are they swimming in? Blue and clear, deep and lovely, unfettered by others, not bloodied by competition. Gosh, that's a good metaphor, isn't it? But are there really examples of that? Well, they talk about a couple interesting ones. How many of you have been to Barnum and Bailey's Ringling Brothers Circus? Oh, a lot of grandparents out there, I see. That's the biggest crowd we've ever had for that. Well, you know, the Barnum Bailey Circus has been around since really before 1875, but collectively they've been around for quite a long time. They're kind of a fun, you know, you get the peanuts and the popcorn and the smell of the whatchamacallit and the lions and the tigers and the bears. Oh, my. But as a business, you might describe them this way, failing. Okay? They've lost money for years now, failing, dying. It's a dying business. Now, how many have been to Cirque du Soleil? Less. A little frightening, but did you like the elephants and the tigers at Cirque du Soleil? You didn't see any. Where did you see it, by the way? Was it in a big tent in some yard, some field? Where was it? Las Vegas. You took the kids to it, did you? No. Do you see the difference? Only, well, when the digital age began, a group of mimes in Toronto was asked to develop a touring circus company, and they developed this little group that did acrobatics and so on, but they couldn't afford elephants. So they said, what the heck, let's not have them. And they developed a very showy, you know, really entertaining presentation, different than circuses actually, but fundamental to a circus. So they called it a circus, you know, using the French word. But is Cirque du Soleil a circus? No. It's its own thing, isn't it? And it's one of the most successful businesses in the world.
Now, another blue ocean strategy is what Yellowtail has done. Who's familiar with Yellowtail wines? Okay. Who do you think is the blue ocean customer group that Yellowtail targeted? College freshmen.
No.
No? Middle age? Anyone else? Yuppies?
No. Definitely not yuppies. Nope. No, not wine connoisseurs. It's the worst wine you ever drank.
Yeah. They targeted the opposite of a wine connoisseur. They went after beer drinkers. Beer drinkers was their blue ocean.
Because every once in a while, a beer drinker has to go to a party, and they have to take a bottle of wine, and they don't have a clue what to take. And Yellowtail said, why don't we make it easy for them? Why don't we make two kinds, white and red, and we'll color code them, because they're beer drinkers.
Yeah. We'll make the bottles the same.
See, when they taste test, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Nope.
When they taste tested the product they wanted to bring out with wine connoisseurs, they said, pooey, never drink it. This is the worst slop I've ever had. They gave it to a beer drinker. What do you think the beer drinker said? I like this. That's exactly right. And so what were they trying to do? They're trying to tap into an unexplored or unexploited market and develop a product that's similar but stood apart. Does that make sense?
It's not fussy. The labeling on the bottle itself is not complicated at all. It doesn't take a wine snob to understand Yellowtail. They sell it at Costco. They sell it at Costco. In 2001, they sold 112,000 cases. 5 years later, 7.5 million.
Now they represent 85% of the Australian wine market, one company. Now, they were backed by the biggest liquor distributor in the world. So let's not kid ourselves. Their marketing was developed by the biggest liquor distributor in the world. But their marketing was based on having 2 wines, and they're not fussy. Now what do they have? 12 wines, and they're failing. Because all those wines are crappy. Their Merlot tastes like the ordinary crappy Merlot. You know, go watch Sideways. Okay? But when they sold the 2, they were perfect. So one of the things about Blue Ocean that you have to understand is if you create an innovative product that's new and different for the title business, and it sells, don't go back to the old way of doing it once you're successful. That's the kiss of death. Curves. How many know what Curves is? Okay? Curves was on the Blue Ocean list. Now, because they're failing, they're not. Because what did they do? They started offering 24/7 exercise when they didn't need to. They started having men there. It was a women's only club. The notion of Blue Ocean is that you create an innovative product, you differentiate it with a different or new group of customers, you price it so that it is valued right at the initiation, it's valuable in price, and then as you become successful, you lower your cost. Because if you can lower your cost as you're selling more, no one can beat you, because no one can compete against that. If you raise your sales, but your costs are going up, I can compete against you. But if you are selling more and more every year, and yet your internal cost, your expenses are going down, no competitor can beat that formula. And that's what a Blue Ocean can do, if you can think of one.
Okay, this is what we call the strategy canvas. This is a Blue Ocean idea, and we use it just so that your present strategies or market factors, you can kind of see where they line up in terms of your strengths and weaknesses. So what this is we've listed along the left-hand side here the typical strategies that title companies compete on.
Price, location, coverage, relationships, accuracy, complexity, services, speed, technology, others.
This is something you can do with your management team back at your company. You list your company, and let's say you can use a 5-point rating. Example of one agent that's been rated, and you can see on our graph here that awareness or their marketing effort and the speed at which they produce, let's say, their commitments
Is above average.
is above average. The rest are all kind of middle of the road.
So you would say, if they're going to compete on anything, they're going to differentiate, they would do it on people being aware of them or on their speed. Now here's another company in the same market. They have no awareness, but they have good relationships, they are very accurate, they are also fast, and they are complex, meaning they do commercial. So is this company competing the same way the other is? No, when you put them together, in fact, they now don't line up. And you can see in the strategy canvas, if you paint yourself against First American and Fidelity or whoever else down the street, if you paint your company against them honestly, you'll start to see, are we all the same or how are we different? And this is, in the Blue Ocean idea is, this is the first step in figuring out, what do I want to be? Because you look at what am I doing now and what are the other guys doing? Now, a nice way to think about this, even if you didn't do the mapping, is to ask yourself these 4 questions. Is there something we do today, something you do, that should just be eliminated? Who can, you don't have to say it out loud, but who immediately thought of something we do procedurally that we should stop doing? Raise your hand if you thought of something. Okay. Oh. So what's the thing you could do differently? All the way in the back. Will you tell me? So you could stop thinking about brick and mortar. Right, that's exactly right. And you remember that David mentioned Broward County, and we worked in Broward. Winnie recordings were in there, and we had a client in that time period when it started that had completely or we're getting ready to, completely dropping his title production brick and mortar. He's going to get rid of it because everything could be done from the searcher and examiner's homes. And he was just going to have them work at home because they could go online to the courthouse and do everything they needed from records. He wasn't going to have a title plant. Well, that's a whole different idea, isn't it? But that's exactly right. Now, what could you do less of? Or what could you improve as your business is now changing in this next year that's coming up? Because we're going to see real estate grow dramatically. You may not believe that, but we already are, actually. So what is it your business could do to make you stand out from everybody else? Well, one thing is do something so different or something that takes so much cost out that you're immediately more competitive. But you could also think about what could we improve, or maybe something we don't even offer now that we could offer. Surely, don't call me that, surely in the next year or two, one of these guys on this row here, one of these guys is going to do something innovative that all of you will adopt. Surely they will, because that's what technology is like. We don't know what it'll be. I don't know what it'll be. But you know what? You could do that too. So those of you that are the owner of a company or the manager of a company, or partner in a company, it's certainly the case that you have the opportunity to be every bit as innovative or different than the guy down the street. I don't mean that you should do this, but just for example, does anybody offer online scheduling of closings? You do, actually? Okay. I mean, you might say, why would I want customers to be able to do that, and I won't be able to control things? But you see, if you start with yeah, but, you'll never get beyond yeah, but. Take the idea and see what you can make of it. That's what the Blue Ocean strategy suggests. Take a great idea, don't yeah, but it to death at first, and develop it and see if you can make money out of it because you offer something no one else can. We think the opportunity is there for a number of different things right now. Here's some questions you should ask. They're kind of were answered today, I guess. Right, Chris? How long does it take to record a transaction? I mean, we know it speeds up the process, but it only does so if you're still setting up the files the same way you always did. Maybe you're not taking advantage of that speed fully, right? What does it cost you? Well, if you're still using the same 3 people you always used when you only need 1, what is it costing you? You see what I mean? So when you think about you're going to introduce this new technology, what are the other steps you could take to make it much more cost effective and to change the way you do business? Because if all it is just an electronic way of delivering documents worked up the same way, you haven't saved much. Do you see what I'm saying? But I think you've got quite an opportunity here.
Okay, so we're going to take a step back now and look at organizational change from a broader perspective. We know that change in our title agencies is often caused by external factors, government regulations. We're talking about e-recording today, and that is going to cause change. But real change within our agencies has to come from good management, good leadership, and employees who have to adapt. In the end, our employees have to adapt, and we have to be able to lead them in that adaptation. So,
the typical change process.
Yeah, we have about a 7-step process that we go through that we use, and we're going to talk about each of these steps. Vision, creating an overall direction for yourself, assessing kind of if you're ready for change in your title agency. You have to have good communication procedures. You have to have a plan, and we're going to talk about that quite a bit. Pilot testing is always a good idea if possible, and then as a part of your implementation, you have to evaluate along the way. So those are important things.
The first step in any major change is to envision a new future. Do you all know what the cloud is? Do you understand the idea of the cloud? Cloud computing, you know? It's like we're not going to have Windows on our laptop anymore. We're going to have the application somewhere electronically, and we're just going to address it through the internet, and all our things will be stored on the internet, and everything will be done on the internet. We'll be living on the internet, apparently, in the cloud. And some of us have been in clouds for years, but that's a different story. Can you imagine having a title company where everything was done on some remote server in Indonesia and you never looked at it or saw it or touched it and you had no brick and mortar? Could you envision that? You can? Can you? What's the first step, man? How do we get there? A lot of design, right. It's going to be very different, isn't it? So maybe we're going to have to learn about what cloud technology means, or maybe we're going to have to, but you know what? In most visionaries, they don't start with the technical part of it. They just envision how it will feel or touch. So, you know, the iPad was invented before the iPhone. You know that, don't you? The iPad was invented 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But they just didn't have a way to make it work right. And then somebody said, kind of cavalierly, well, hell, you know, if you put a phone in it, at least it'd be useful. And they said, yeah, hell, you could make it smaller, too. Really, if it was just a phone, you could make it smaller. Well, let's do that. And they invented this. But their goal was the thing half of you have today, the iPad. And they had a working model of it. Because that's what Steve Jobs wanted. He didn't want a phone. Bill Gates and he both envisioned a tablet 30 years ago and talked actively about a tablet. I want to create a title company that's different. So start with telling me how it's different. Well, people come to me by the internet. They don't visit our office because we don't have one. We've got 22 employees across the country who work out of their office. You see them on a computer through Skype. I mean, start to think about verbally describing each element as if it exists in the future. Visualize it and build a company that's different, or build a product. Now, not all of us can do that, but most great change comes about from vision. But once you have a vision,
once you have a direction, once you know what change you're trying to cause through your leadership, this is a simple idea. How ready are your people? If you're going to have your employees adapt, which one of them is going to be resistive? Or do you have a whole group of people who are going to cause resistance and be a major roadblock for you, major obstacle? This is a simple little thing we do. It's a yes-no checklist. We go through it and we assess our employees on these types of questions. In this example, the employee's pretty ready for change. They're not going to they don't, in fact, actively oppose change efforts. They don't passively resist.
they accept change readily.
They agree with the need for change. They're dissatisfied or they're not with the present state. But I'm going to make those assessments and come up with a simple score, if you will, in terms of who's ready in my company and who isn't. I can do this for a whole team. I can do it for the whole company.
You see, assessing readiness is a way of looking at who will be a barrier to change. So if you're going to get rid of your brick and mortars, or you're going to, drop the way you do certain things, there are going to be people in the organization who would resist that, right? Who'd suffer from that. I mean, if you think about it, Texas and New York they're not both attorney states, and yet the attorney groups have actively opposed almost every change in the title business for the last 20 years. They're actively opposed every new idea and slowed down ideas. Because what? They're conservative, they're risk averse, I don't know. But you could also say they're barriers. Now sometimes you need a barrier, don't you? Because everybody listens to them and you got to figure out how to get them on board. So sometimes the best thing you can do with someone who's really oppositional is what? Put them in charge of it,
Yeah.
right? And how many have been put in charge of a project you opposed? I just wanted to see who the barriers were out there, but okay. Oh, I have many times, but if you think about it, when we're trying to bring about change, when we have a clear vision and we know who's ready and who's not, then we have to take steps to get everybody on board. And there are kind of some easily recognizable things you can do to remove barriers or involve people in change. Now, if you think about it on the change side, when we think about people and why they push away from change, why do they not want to go to Windows 8? You know, I don't want to go to Windows 8. Why don't you? Well, I don't know. I'm afraid of it. I don't blame you, because when I went to Windows 8, you know, designed for touchscreen, and I now downloaded and installed Windows 8 on my touchscreen computer that has Windows 7, there's just one problem. The Windows 8 shut off the touch function. You see, if you have an experience like that, you're going to start going, well, I don't want to do that, right? Now I got to help a person get ready for it, don't I? So when you have a new vision, you have to really sell that vision. And some people fear change because they're invested in the past. Some people are afraid of the power they'll lose or the responsibility. There's all kinds of human or psychological reasons why people resist change. So you can't approach it like they're all the same. You may have to individually say, how do I get Betty to join and how do I get Bob to join? But if you're the leader of a company and trying to bring about change, one of your primary goals, if you're going to bring that company back to success, if you will, is to think about how to get everybody on board. We use the idea of the DISC. It's a way of profiling people's behavior. Now, we just mention it here because in the title industry, when you do a DISC, there are 22, there used to be 22 DISC styles possible. We've only seen 5 in the title industry. So when we surveyed a company of 700 title employees, we didn't see all 22 profiles. We saw 5. So the title industry tends to have very similar people in it. Does that make sense? Careful, people who like the past, people who like history and so on. You know, they tend to attract certain kinds of folks. And that's good because now you can use an assessment like this and you can say, maybe the reason Tom doesn't want to change over his computer is because he's this style and this style resists change. So we use something like this to think about, again, just how we assess readiness. I thought this would have been yours. I've worn out, but okay. Sooner or later, you got to talk about what you want to do. And in fact, you may have to have a plan to communicate it, because if you're going to bring about big change in your company, or even small, if your first step is a misstep, it can be your last step. We had a company in Maryland, a hospital company, that was going to change the way it did everything. I mean, everything. And we had a really big, game plan. We had a 100-page manual of all the things that would change in the hospital and blah, blah, blah. But the CEO wanted to come out and make a little announcement to the doctors and nurses and managers. So he just formed an impromptu meeting of the doctors, nurses, and managers. And he walked out and told the story without it ever being written, without it scripted, without anybody reading it or looking at it, without the consultant who worked for a year on the new design going over it with him. He just walked out and said, hello, folks, let me tell you what I plan to do. Here's the things I plan to do. And pretty close. 10 minutes into the story, he'd lost the whole group. 20 minutes into the story, the project was over. I'm not kidding. He destroyed it because he frightened the hell out of everybody, because his communication was a misstep. And I'm not kidding. I mean, it was a huge, expensive misstep. So when you think about, you're excited, you want to change something you heard today, you've got to think about how will you communicate e-recording so that you don't scare the heck out of them and get them excited about it, because you are. Does that make sense? That may take a little planning.
The fourth step that we often talk about after communicating the change and having really good communication procedures is that for big scale change, we often, in a title agency, we form a design team. And the idea there is simply to understand the current state. In other words, what are our workflow procedures right now, and how are they going to be affected given what's coming in? So if we're talking about new software, for example, what do we have to do with the present system in terms of the new steps that are going to be required? And this is a step that often we see in title agencies that it's not done.
Yeah.
You know, we tried, as Roger said earlier, we try to layer something on top of an old system or process, and we haven't understood what needs to change. We use mapping to clearly understand what in the present has to change to be compatible with the future. And that's an important idea. You need to really understand what new steps are going to be required for your e-recording, for example.
Now, once you've got a plan, a very simple, good idea, conservative ideas, a risk-averse idea is to test it. You know, that's the other failing we've seen sometimes with companies is they get this really big, brilliant idea and they jump in whole hog without adequately testing it maybe in one office or one person, one employee. So if you've got a new idea then, and you really want to bring it about, testing it is a great suggestion. Now the other thing we would say is, in our experience of changing companies, you will experience a lot of yeah buts. I mean, if I said we're going to get rid of the title commitment, we're not going to have a commitment anymore, or I say we're going to get rid of readers, you're going to go, well, we can't get rid of readers. And I'm going to say, I didn't ask you, could we? I said we're going to. You just yeah-butted me. Well, that's the #1 barrier in our experience to progress, is the first thing out of somebody's mouth is, yeah, but that doesn't work. Yeah, but I tried that. Yeah, but you can't. So when we start a project, we always make it a rule. You yeah, but you wear that button the whole day. And you bet yeah, but a couple times, you ain't on the team anymore, or maybe in the company anymore. But yeah button ain't allowed. And that actually helps, because we get rid of that normal, first reaction of it can't. And now we say, well, how can it? We open our ideas. The other thing we've found is that if you want to bring about change, if you're the owner of the company or one of the principals of the company, and you're going to bring about something new in your marketplace, you got to go everywhere you can and tell that story. I still don't get this picture, but
Oh, it's Susan Tempest, right?
oh, I don't want to tell a story. Okay. We're out of time. One of the things that we would encourage you is, as a company, if you don't have a statement of vision and values, is create a statement for the future, but talk about what you want to be in 2013, not what you are. Talk about what you want to be. Now, this is the president of ALTA, Frank Pellegrini. This is his vision and values for his company. It's from his website. Was it great? No. Did it take him a long time? No. It took him 4 meetings, 2 hours each, to craft a clear statement of what he wanted to be and what was important to his company. Now, he had some excellent consulting help. Frank, if you ask him, will tell you it took forever. But it really took him 4 sessions. So if you want to change your company, and we're still going to talk about in the digital age again, we're going to come back to it, but if you want to change your company, here's some things you can think about. Just go back to the Mission Restaurant Impossible idea. Start running it differently. If you've been running it or managing it the same way forever, change that. Maybe you should think about creating a new brand, a new logo, a new image, a new color scheme for the front office. How about a budget? How many of you have a budget in your company? How many do not? Yeah, a bunch. Not too bad, kind of a mix. if you're 2 people, you don't need a budget. But if you're 10 people, you probably should have a budget. And every good business has a budget. So make a commitment for next year, starting right now. Go home, make a spreadsheet, write down orders, closings, gross revenue, cost of sales, that's underwriting, net income, labor expense, other than labor expense, FTE, that's employees, and profit. Write down those categories, and then put your numbers for 2012 in one column, and then put your anticipated numbers for 2013. Now you have a budget. It's not more complicated than that if you don't want it to be, and you don't need an accountant to do it, or a lawyer. You just need to understand what you're trying to achieve. And if you don't have a budget, it can be as simple as that, putting those into a simple spreadsheet. We do it all the time. It can be more difficult, of course. But if you don't have one, why not start with one? Because it's the same as saying, set goals. You can go so far, though. This is a client we have. He has an active dashboard which reports to him 25 different metrics real time every day. So he looks at income, orders, expenses every day in a dashboard. If you want to get that elaborate, you can. But the point is, if you're not measuring some aspect of your business today, it's something you could do regardless of technology. It's just something a good business does. How about, though, let's go a little techno. We don't know whether this is a good website or not, do we, Chris? It's certainly got a lot going on. So if you go to Setco.com, setcoservices.com, man, it has all kinds of stuff moving around on here. Now, maybe it's too gaudy and too Florida-y for a New York website, and maybe you'd like a picture of a library with a bookcase of law books or something. But think about, does your website offer every kind of calculator possible? Does it have free apps that I can download for my mobile? This one does. This guy believes he will own his market because of technology, and we're not sure he's wrong. But you can also go and look at Prairie Title, President of Alta. Look at his website. Not nearly as flashy, but it's got a lot of nice features on it. Right?
And we've been talking about big change, but oftentimes to get change going in a title agency, we can do some small things that are very important. So here's some ideas. Elevator speech. Who knows what an elevator speech is? What's an elevator speech?
1 or 2 minute presentation that tells people everything about your business while you're on the elevator.
Exactly.
Perfect.
If everyone in my company can get on an elevator in 2 minutes, provide our vision, why you should do business with us, why we're better than our competitors, if I can do that in 2 minutes, if everyone in my company can do that, then I really have something. So that's a small change, but an important one. This idea of town hall meetings is something that I recently...
Did you grow up in New England or something?
Yeah, well, this is a good local kind of thing, perhaps. But town hall meetings are great. I did one just about a month ago. We came up with 10, the employees came up with 10 ideas for change. And the great thing about town halls is that you're asking your employees for input. And even if you just go one of their ideas, even if you just accept one of their ideas and act on it, all of a sudden you've created ownership. They're using my idea. Great motivator. Marketing and sales is also something that perhaps has changed in your organization because you don't do a lot of it. Who does an 80-20? Who has done an 80-20 analysis of their customer base in this room? I should give her another
No,
book.
I can't. I don't think she'd be bored by it, but tell us what that means.
Well, you get 80% of your business from 20% of your customers.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
So-
that is that's not just a guideline or a guess. It's really a truism.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, there'll be exceptions, but in nature, we find that in everything. Every phenomenon in nature, the 80-20 principle applies, and we see it in title companies all the time, where, you know, maybe it's a little different, like it's 64 something, but it's the notion that if you have 100 customers, only 20 of them matter. You're wasting your time on the other 80. And if your sales force is calling on that other 80 and they don't produce results from them, you're wasting your time and your money. So the 80-20 principle is a great principle if you know who they are. But we find a lot of times in title companies, we'll say, can you bring us your 80-20 list? And you have a day to get it, and they can't get it in a day.
Typically, there's a group of customers right under the 20% of your customer base that gives you 80% of your business. There's a group of customers right under that that we call the B segment. That's where your opportunity is. Those people are giving you about 50% or less of their business.
But they have business to give.
But they have business to give. So in terms of customer targets, see, that's who we want to go after. But we have to do the analysis first to understand those kind of ratios.
Now, all we're trying to suggest is that before you invest in technology, there are other ways in which you could improve your business, but we're going to end by talking about a couple technology ideas, and we'll, I hope, stay on time to do that quickly. But I do want to say this. If you don't believe it, you need to, because real estate is coming back. Do you believe that? How many believe it? Okay? Northeast this year, up 13%. Nationally, only up 10%. Northeast, up 13%. Prices, though, Why? Maybe you were overpriced. I don't know. But your prices aren't rising like that. But you're starting to sell, right? Do you see that in your companies? A little bit? And you know, in California, I just bought a home in California, and when I started looking in February, there was a 9-month inventory. In July, when I looked at 55 homes, there was a 1-week inventory. When I bought my home, there were no inventories, and there were 4 or 5 bidders above list because the market had turned, and when buyers want to buy, they want to buy. Well, not every market will be like that in New York, but some are, aren't they? They've been waiting a long time to buy, and the prices are still good, right? It's a perfect time for you to own your marketplace. Not share it with somebody else, own it. Think about this.
This is a blue ocean idea. And these are facts. The idea here is to get ahead of a transaction channel. The idea here really is to think about the consumer, perhaps selling to the consumer or the actual buyer. For the first time ever, more people go on the internet in terms of the very first thing that they do. 90% of all home buyers use the internet first for a search. And more home sellers do the same thing.
Zillow accounts for 32 million unique hits a month. Trulia has 23 million unique hits a month. That's nationally. Now, in your marketplace in, you know, Westchester or in Rochester, of course that number is smaller, but it's huge. And as Chris said, it is the first site that every seller and buyer actually goes to today. They go to Zillow or Trulia. And you know what? They don't see any title ads because there are no title ads. There are no title ads on the leading internet sites for real estate. There are no title insurance company ads locally or nationally, and the sales director doesn't know why, except you guys don't seem to get advertising. Let's just kind of look at this if we can.
Lone Star Title is the only local-owned, full-service title company headquartered right here in El Paso. At Lone Star Title, we remain optimistic, encouraged, and excited about El Paso and our future. We all should be confident in our local economy. Lone Star Title remains financially strong as your independent title company, and we represent the country's most solid, financially secure underwriters. We are proud to serve our El Paso community and the players that make up our great marketplace. Lone Star Title, the local brand.
That advertising was produced for free by a friend. John has a dozen of these. He shows them on, at times when there's doesn't cost you anything on, public access TV or whatever. And it's goofy, isn't it? TV advertising for a title company, except he's the #1 in the market. And he wasn't 3 years ago. He is now. He owns the market. He's the #1 residential and commercial dealer in the market. He's over all the underwriters. And he's this goofy guy that likes to get up in front and say, "Hi, howdy, I'm going to have the local title company." And everybody you talk to, every realtor goes, "Oh, that's John Martin, the guy on TV." Yeah. 588-8600. Right. Right. Now, it might seem goofy, but if it's free, it isn't goofy. It's called advertising. But we've taken a notion that certain things we don't do, when in fact, maybe in the future, as we go to a new technology, we could do some things that are different. I'm going to go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. I think we're...
Let's finish up by talking just a little bit about the digital age. We've got one more opportunity, I guess. Can anyone tell me what the middle computer is in the center top? Nope. Any guesses? I'm sorry? No, it's not. It looks like one, though. These are all apples. If that helps. Yeah, okay, passed it up to Lisa. Here's the history of technology from the 12 tablets, somewhere around 439 BC, to the iPad, with the desktop computer coming in 1965. I had one of these, by the way, and in 70 I had one. Also, I worked on a mainframe that was in a single room, and it was $12 million, and it took up the entire floor of a university like this. It had less computing power, of course, than this does. Apple history, like all technology, has been a dramatic, rapid change, right? Think about, we didn't have the internet 10 years ago that functioned for us, and now we can't live without it. A big screen TV, a phone, or texting. I don't know why. But if you think about it, 4 years ago, you didn't have this. Apps on your cell phone. Now you do, right? So in our mind, you can't, I know this is yours, but in our mind, you can't ignore this wave of technology that's coming. Now, but New York has a kind of history of doing that. You're often the last. But some of you out there don't need to be. So our message is, if you look at the things that you do as a title company, here there's just a normal list. Take an order, search the order, examine the search, create a commitment to issue policy, get a lender package, schedule closing, process the package to completion, work up the HUD, actually do the closing, issue the policy, record the documents, and so on. Those are all steps that you take some or all part of in the title industry. But in the digital age, could you do all of them virtually? Could you do all of them in the cloud? Could you do all of them with a third-party vendor? Could you do your whole business differently and start either with one thing next year that is fundamentally different? I don't know what it should be because I'm not a wizard. But I know that you could take any one of these ideas and expand on it using technology and deliver something no one's seen in your market. Because we know these things are going to come. Technology and consumerism will change your industry in a way you may not recognize. Artificial intelligence has already done so. 20% of all residential files can be or are artificially examined, searched and examined without a human looking at them. Automated escrow processes. Of course, we said e-recording. Along with that, centralizing more and more production or outsourcing your work. In many states today, you don't need to get your title evidence the same way we did. And so people are buying their title evidence and they're getting rid of their title employees Well, that could be half or more of your cost right there. And the same with escrow. As we move to these ideas, you have to decide, are you going to wait until it's already worked out and there and working, and you'll be the last to join, or will you be risky and bold enough to get in front of one of these steps and try to maybe be in your market the leader of that idea? Maybe it's just a little innovation, but could it be something that no one else will do as well as you do and will make you stand out in your market because you were a leader in some aspect of technology or in all aspects of technology? That's the challenge that you have, and to solve that, it'll take a couple things. You'll never bring about change without leadership. It helps if you have a plan. Shooting from a hip can be dangerous, okay? It really helps if the employees want to do it. It's very helpful if they've bought in. And in fact, if you think about it, all you're trying to do is to get people to see the way of doing title insurance differently, to see your vision and to implement your vision for you, and to make that vision stand out from the competitors. And we think that there's a number of innovations that are coming up that you could be a part of. I hope that our ideas were interesting. We'll welcome questions if there's time, or talk to you another time. I will say our book, if you didn't get one, unfortunately, is available on Amazon. And if you're interested in getting it and getting it at a discount price, you could leave me your card with your email, and I'll tell you more about that. I'm sorry? No, we do not, for a good reason. E-books are impossible to put graphics into. They're very challenging, and we have hundreds of graphics in here, tables and graphs. And so Roger decided that he would not spend 4 months of his life. We will eventually, but they're challenging. For novels, I have a couple novels, and e-books are easy, but business books, a little more difficult. So we're coming out with another one next year, and we'll probably e-book it too, though. But you know, this one's still. Anything else? Thank you for your time.